Hi, good morning and welcome back. My name is Joanne Lee. I am the policy manager here at Midwest BDC, and I'm going to introduce our opening speaker for today. Um, which is about understanding Justice40 and the Inflation Reduction Act. So this is really going to set the stage for today and talk about how we sustain our work. What does the IRA work mean for the future? And now I'm going to introduce Jamal Lewis. Jamal is the Director of Implementation, Learning, and Integration for Rewiring America. Previously, he led the energy and climate initiatives at the Green and Healthy Homes Initiative and worked with states and localities across the country to advance electrification, healthy housing, and energy efficiency programs and policies. He has multiple publications outlining pathways to promoting equity by retrofitting our existing housing stock to be healthy, energy efficient, all electric, and affordable. He is a young, gifted, and Green 40 Under 40 award recipient for his leadership in environmental justice. Welcome, Jamal.
Thank you, Joanne, and thank you, Marnice and Midwest BDC for hosting this incredible summit. And I'm really happy to be here. As Joanne mentioned, I'm going to talk a little bit about the Justice40 initiative and the Inflation Reduction Act, and I will be sharing some slides. Great. So I'm just going to dive right in. What is the Justice40 initiative? Actually, let me back up. So recognizing that the climate crisis disproportionately burdens certain communities with air pollution, with increased risk of negative impacts from storms and other natural disasters, and recognizing that those same communities experience bundles of burdens that impact us every day. So unaffordable housing, unaffordable energy bills, increased risk of public health concerns. These are all burdens that, for the most part, impact the same groups of people disproportionately. And so the Justice40 initiative is a way of directing resources to those communities that need them the most. And so the Justice40 initiative came out of President Biden's Executive Order 14008. And the executive order itself is a mandate across the federal government to address the climate crisis. But one of the things that it did was establish a metric by which the government measures itself in the deployment of funds. So Justice40 is ensuring that at least 40% of the benefits of federal funds flow to disadvantaged communities or communities that bear the brunt of the climate crisis. This is really a whole of government approach that every federal government agency is responsible for adhering to. So there is a list of covered programs at each federal government agency, and you can just look up, whatever federal government agency that you're interested in, Justice40 covered programs, and it'll take you to a document that lists all of those programs for which 40% of the benefits have to go to disadvantaged communities. You can see the Department of Housing and Urban Development here, the EPA, Department of Energy, just as an example. So the Justice40 initiative applies again to it's a framework that applies to all of federal government funding within this administration, and that includes the Inflation Reduction Act. The Inflation Reduction Act, I imagine many of you have heard of at this point, but it is the seminal law that supports the mitigation of climate change and supports reducing emissions. It does that by leveraging rebates, tax credits, financing, and manufacturing incentives to boost the market for greenhouse gas reducing technologies. So solar, wind, heat pumps, induction stoves, utility scale, battery storage, electric vehicles, as examples. So it provides incentives to decarbonize our power supply, to decarbonize transportation, and to decarbonize our building stock as well. So we like to think about the IRA as like buckets of money. And here's one way of organizing those buckets of money. You see the vast majority is tax credits, and there's a range there because the amount that ultimately gets deployed via tax credits depends on how many people take the government up on those. So if I qualify for a tax credit and I do not claim it, that is money that sort of is lost in the ether, but that could have been claimed. So if everyone that is eligible to claim a tax credit claims it, that can result in up to $400 billion in revenue, or in economic benefit coming to our communities that isn't being paid in taxes. The Greenhouse Gas Reduction Fund is the single largest non-tax program in the IRA. It provides financing and loan infrastructure for the deployment of clean energy technologies. The Climate Pollution Reduction Grant, which is what CPRG stands for, is effectively block grant funding for states and local governments to plan to develop a climate pollution reduction plan and to move forward with the implementation of elements of that plan. So there's $5 million for states and local governments. Excuse me. There are $3 billion in environmental justice community block grants. That $3 billion is split amongst a few different programs, including the Community Change Grant, which many of you may already be aware of. And then home energy rebates is a $9 billion pot of funds for the improvement of our homes. So improving the energy efficiency, helping to transition to more efficient appliances. There's $9 billion in rebates for that purpose. So I'll have a couple more slides. I won't go into everything. I'll just sort of bucket this out. But the top two are the two rebate programs. The first one is specifically for the upgrading of appliances to more efficient appliances, more efficient electric appliances. The second row is rebates for broader improvement of energy efficiency of our homes. The next two are tax credits. The first one is a tax credit for energy for upgrades that lead to energy savings. So heat pump water heaters, weatherization, panel upgrades. The fourth row has to do with promoting and advancing power production on a residential property. So solar, battery storage, and rooftop solar, battery storage, and geothermal. The next tax credit has to do with electric vehicles. So there's now a tax credit for both new electric vehicles and used electric vehicles. So if you purchase a used vehicle, you can then claim a tax credit. And then the next two are for commercial buildings and for new buildings, new and substantially renovated buildings. So there's incentives across the housing stock or across the consumer landscape to both improve energy efficiency and reduce greenhouse gas emissions. There are non-consumer facing incentives. So these are incentives that support local governments, nonprofit organizations, houses of worship, other commercial entities. to allow them to more effectively and more affordably help communities transition to cleaner, more renewable energy. So the direct pay provision allows for, again, houses of worship, local governments, and nonprofits that have no tax liability. They don't pay any taxes at all. And previously, if you didn't have tax liability, you couldn't claim a lot of the existing tax credits for renewable energy or for energy efficiency. Now, the Inflation Reduction Act allows for those for houses of worship, local governments, and nonprofits to claim and to get a direct payment for investments, for direct payments for the value of the tax credit for qualifying investments in renewable energy and energy efficiency. So this is a pretty amazing this is pretty amazing, and I think will really allow for more clean energy projects to hit communities, recognizing that houses of worship, local governments, and nonprofits already do a lot of this work anyway. There are tax credits not only for electric vehicles, but for EV charging infrastructure, so charging stations, wiring, etc. The top two I've already mentioned, so the Greenhouse Gas Reduction Fund, Climate Pollution Reduction Grants. And then the second row has to do with just a base tax credit increase for things like roof for solar, battery storage, and there's also a separate bonus adder, which I didn't include in here, specifically to help support low-income and disadvantaged communities. So the credit can be valued up to 70% of the project cost if it meets certain criteria, including being in a low-income community or in a disadvantaged community. And then these are the environmental justice programs housed at the Environmental Protection Agency, the EPA. The community change is probably the most well-known. This is a $2 billion pot of funds that community organizations can apply to design and implement any pollution reducing project. So this can include cleaning up water. This can include Superfund site pollution reduction. It can also include workforce development, air pollution reduction, greenhouse gas reduction, mitigation. There's a whole host of project types that can qualify here. But the idea is that this gives community-based organizations the opportunity to not just advocate for what they want to happen in communities, which is what a lot of community-based organizations have done and have done well, but it also puts you in the driver's seat to making those things happen. The Thriving Communities grant-making program was created recognizing that oftentimes community-based organizations don't have the capacity to apply to a federal grant because it takes a lot of capacity that some community organizations don't have. So the EPA basically selected 11 sort of like hub nonprofit organizations across the country to receive $600 million. And those 11 organizations are basically passing through the $600 million, or as much of it as possible, to community-based organizations. So the CBO, if you have a project that you want to administer in your community, don't have the capacity to apply to community change or another federal grant, you could apply directly to one of these 11 organizations and have your application evaluated by them and could receive money to deploy your project. The third is a program that focuses on partnerships between community-based organizations to address local environmental and public health issues. There were groups that were selected last year. I think they're going to re-up that program as well, so there might be another group selected this year. And then the government-to-government program is also focused on partnerships, but partnerships between community-based organizations and state and local governments and tribes. So I think one of the through lines with a lot of the funding opportunities with the Inflation Reduction Act is, I think the EPA specifically has heard a lot of the feedback that they've gotten from community-based organizations wanting ownership over projects, and these grant opportunities really create that mechanism for CBOs to have more ownership over the projects in their community. I think, yeah. And so I work for an organization called Rewiring America. We've created a tool that helps households understand all the incentives that you could get from the Inflation Reduction Act. We've also, since the development of the slide, for a handful of states, also have included state and local incentives. So the idea is that this can be sort of a one-stop shop for a household that wants to braid different funds to do a more comprehensive retrofit for their existing home. So try out this calculator. It's on our website, rewiringamerica.org, and I'm happy to take some questions.
I believe Angie has a question.
Yes, I do.
Okay.
Good morning. Thank you so much for your presentation, Jamal. I'm not camera ready yet, so I'm not turning on my camera yet, but I do have a question for you. Do you know what is the maximum amount someone can receive if they individually participate and apply for all of these tax credits?
So the question is an individual. You're talking about like a resident?
Mm-hmm. Like if I were talking to someone in the community about this, I would love to be able to say, look, if you took advantage of absolutely everything, this is the maximum amount you could receive. Like people like to know, what's the range here?
Yeah, it's hard to give a range, and I'll tell you why.
Okay.
Let me maybe put that slide back up.
Thank you.
All right, so an individual resident. So if we're talking about tax credits specifically, we're really looking at the three in the middle. So the electrification and efficiency tax credit, solar and storage, and the EV tax credit. Those are the ones that are consumer facing. For the electrification and efficiency tax credit, 25C, you can get up to 30%, up to $3,200 a year. So in a year, $3,200 is the cap that one can get. There are subcaps within that we'll go too deep into. But the reason it's hard to know how much an individual can get is because that 3,200 re-ups every year. So if you have more work that you want to do on your home, you can get 3,200 5 consecutive years or 10 consecutive years. So there's a huge range there. The solar and storage tax credit is 30% of the project costs. So it's a function of how much it costs. So if it's a $30,000 project, you can get up to $10,000 in a tax credit. If it's a $10,000 project, you can get up to like $3,300. So there's a huge range. If it's 50,000, you get the point. So there's just a huge range there. EV tax credits also depends on how many cars you want to buy, but so it's just hard. It's hard to tell what the max is because effectively they're unlimited. It really depends on how much of investments one is making.
That makes sense. It still makes me want to make a graphic that is like an average household with 2 cars. If they install solar based on the average solar cost, this is what it cost with it. This would what it would cost without it. But this is helpful. It's a lot to learn and navigate.
It totally is. And one important piece of information that I did not share is the fact that the ones that are on the screen right now are not refundable. And so that really makes it challenging for low-income households specifically to take advantage of them. What that means is, like, I could not get a refund for the amount of the tax credit. I would have to owe taxes, and then the amount of my tax credit will be deducted from the amount that I owe. And so that makes it more challenging. A lot of people really fought for these tax credits to be refundable, but Congress had other plans.
They always do. Thank you so much for the additional information. I appreciate you.
Yeah, no problem.